So let me introduce Carl. Carl Field is a current graduate student at Old Dominion University, working toward his Master's of Art degree in History. He earned a Bachelor's of Arts degree in History from Virginia Tech in 2017. He served as a public school teacher at Churchland High School in Portsmouth from 21 to 23, teaching social studies. As a graduate student, he has interned and worked closely with us at the Norfolk Historical Society since the summer of 2024, when he researched the historical origins of Sewell's Point Golf Course and presented his findings to an audience at the club here. I assume and how many of you all were there. Let's see. Norfolk Yacht Country Club. That, as I said, parlayed itself into the history of this facility, this organization. He brought a lot of information about the game of golf to Norfolk, both at Sewell's Point and then here, and kind of the birthplace of golf in Taiwan in many ways. So anyway, in part, Carlin's interest in Norfolk Yacht Club history stems from his own involvement in Elizabeth Manor. His dad told me tonight he made regionals in golf back in high school. You'll get strokes from him if you play. So anyway, if you'll help me welcome Carl Field.
All right. Thanks, Bob. Appreciate that. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to thank Bob Garris and the Norfolk Historical Society at large, as well as the historical committee here at the Yacht Club, particularly Andrea, Betsy, Ann Lockhart, Peggy McPhillips, Michael O'Hearn, and Chip Finch is somewhere in here. I can't find him now. There he is. I may be the mouthpiece up here now conveying all of this research and history to you, but there are a lot of people behind the scenes that make this happen. They deserve recognition. This is a presentation about the historical origins of the Norfolk Yacht and Country Club with the time frame 1896 to 1909. The presentation will largely explore the culture that emerges in these first 13 years and how those early years shaped the culture that is contemporary now. We'll also look at institutional change and continuity over time. But for the most part, this is an episodic trace of the club's movements, its transitions, some internal struggles, as well as a peek into club life. As we go along, I want you to internally think about how the information you're presented with tonight compares and contrasts with your contemporary club. Think about continuity and change, both in the culture as well as the institution. So some historical concepts to keep in mind. Happening in the background of the country club's first 13 years are these historical transformations at a macro level, of which the club played a major role. The club was directly very critical to the suburbanization of the northwestern Norfolk County. This sort of hinterland area here that you see is sparsely inhabited. Here's downtown. So the suburbanization of neighborhoods such as Lambert's Point, Larchmont, as well as Lock Haven and the greater Meadowbrook area can be directly traced to the country club's movements. Also, the country club is involved in this concept of boosterism, that is bringing a certain economic prestige and social status to the city of Norfolk, not necessarily on purpose, but simply for existing and enmeshing the country club's values with the city of Norfolk in general. In these two ways, the country club was fundamental to Norfolk's modernization. And I'd like to read a direct quote from the Daily Pilot from Sunday, June 13th, 1897, and what was the first at-length article about the club. And I believe it perfectly encapsulates the club's mindset and the dynamic that existed between the club and Norfolk. So listen carefully. Quote, "The club furnishes a most excellent means for diversion and entertainment of visitors and guests in Norfolk, and it thereby adds and will continue to add to the real estate values of the city, as well as increase the values of suburban property, for the reason that anything that adds to the attractiveness and ways and means of Norfolk in affording recreation, healthful out-of-door exercise, refining influences, and enjoyable pastimes for society will induce visitors to become residents here and indirectly influence capital to invest in this city. This will largely add to its growth, reputation, and greatly increase the public prosperity." So as we look at the culture of the country club and its institutional machinations, just keep these in mind, okay? This is a timeline visual, sort of to just offer background on the club's movements, its locations, and the periodizations for these first 13 years. And there are also some minor segments that we'll get into along the way. The club was incorporated April 20th, 1896, and the 130th birthday was on Monday. So happy birthday to the Norfolk Yacht and Country Club. You know, there's a reason this club has existed for 130 years. And I think a lot of those reasons will be explored tonight in this presentation. The first site they occupy for 6 years, at which time in October 1st, 1902, they remove themselves even further out of the urban epicenter and go up towards modern-day Norfolk International Terminals, about a mile up the road, turn left at Terminal Boulevard. They're there for a comparatively short time, 4 years, and we'll get into the sort of the weeds about why they're there for such a short time. Then in 1906, in December, the club sells its second site, clubhouse, and land, and they enter an interim period of 2 years, which is characterized by homelessness, sort of a stagnation. There's a suspension of dues. Things are up in the air at this time period. And then the final site, where we sit now, is purchased in late 1908, and the clubhouse is formally opened in February 21st, 1909. Just to give us orientation purposes so you can follow along as we go. The Country Club is a product of Norfolk's, the Country Club is an end product in a long line of club types. At first, there's this concept of a resort, which occupies a position very much outside of the urban center, and the club siphons this aspect and uses it to its advantage. Think of like Virginia Beach or an ocean view, oceanfront. These are concepts of resorts, but they're open to the public largely. Then, in the line of club genealogy, we see men's clubs that start to spread up in the mid to late 1800s. These are exclusive social settings strictly for blue and white collar men who are looking for sort of socialization and fraternization after a long day's work before returning home. And both of these are the predecessors to the American Country Club, of which the Country Club siphons the remoteness of the resorts. It's literally in the name. It occupies the country. And the exclusivity of men's clubs. But the Country Club is different in two ways. It is an inclusive family venue. Men, women, and children are allowed to occupy the tennis courts, play golf. And the second way that is different than resorts and men's clubs is that the complexity and its large membership sort of necessitated that the club function as a micro society. It has its own laws, it has its own traditions, it has its own leadership hierarchy, it has its own membership class divisions as well. Also, transportation technology very much enables people to explore further away from their homes in a shorter amount of time, which is here represented by this photo of the docks at Lambert's Point in 1909. Rail lines as well as bicycles made the world smaller. Families could venture out for a day's trip to the club and then make it back home. Also, the country club at first was established as a bicycle club that was listed in the charter as its mainstay outdoor recreational activity. But over time, it loses that charm, and we'll see why. At the micro level, zooming in on Norfolk, the country club is very much a product of Norfolk's transition from Gilded Age machine politics to the progressive era. The Gilded Age is defined by political corruption, urban poverty, unsanitary downtown conditions, which very much compelled the country club and its founding members to remove themselves from that context. They sought to make their own upstanding moral society with their own values that they could control in the country outside of the purview of the city. There's also a decided lack of governmental action to address some of the social problems I just listed: urban poverty, lawlessness, and especially a lack of green space. Not a lot of investment in city infrastructure or parks and recreation at the turn of the 19th century, and the country club founding members took it upon themselves to make such a place in the country of Norfolk. The club also molded and shaped Norfolk's progressive era movements, and particularly temperance movements, here represented by the Women's Christian Temperance Union. This picture is taken in 1897. It's on Colley Avenue. I'm not sure exactly where. But the country club was involved in temperance movements, settlement houses for urban poor, retirement homes, local soup houses, rehabilitation centers. They donated largely money. They were philanthropists, but also women were directly involved and active in these reform era movements as well. Which brings us to how the club embodies these progressive era values, particularly in the empowerment of women. In these first 13 years, there is unparalleled agency on the women's part. They hold elected office. They are involved in committees. And in my studies of country clubs in general across the United States, this is quite an unparalleled characteristic. And we'll get into that a little bit more. The beautification of green space, manicured lawns, flower beds, interior decorations, these are part of the progressive era, and the country club absorbs that into its institution. Like I said earlier, on April 20th, 1896, Judge Allen R. Hankel of the Corporation Court of Norfolk approves the club charter. And the charter gives us a glimpse into what I call the club's official mind. We get to see the mindset of the founding fathers and what they conceived to be their intentions and purposes. Foremost, it was an athletic country club to promote the interests of outdoor sports. The big three were bicycling, riding horses, and tennis. Over time, this grew to include bowling, golf, and other lawn sports like croquet, tetherball, things of that nature. It promoted the interests of outdoor sports primarily by providing exclusive access to sporting facilities that, again, the city of Norfolk did not. Pillar number 2 is the maintenance and access to a clubhouse. The clubhouse is the architectural and figurative heart of a country club. Without it, there really is only this ephemeral conceptual notion of a club. The clubhouse gives meaning and is a manifestation of really all that the club holds dear. So these two institutional pillars are really the foundation from which everything else emanates and revolves around. There's also this interesting clause where it expresses that each member is granted equal rights and privileges, which I interpreted to be that every member had equal access to the recreational facilities as well as the club amenities, which I believe is a continuing characteristic of the club today. This also granted equal access or equal rights and privileges to all members to participate in the club's institutional body politic, its self-governance, regardless of whether you were an active or an associate member, which were the first two classes at first. Regardless of active or associate, you would have had equal access and privileges. In theory, at least according to the charter. The charter continues. Judge Hankel ruled that the charter made and created a body politic and corporate under the name of the country club. Body politic, exactly what it sounds like. It's self-governance, which can be represented as a body. The club is led by its official mind of elected officers, its long arm of the Board of Governors, specialized standing and ad hoc committees such as a grounds committee, reception committee, housing, golf, and tennis dealt with specialized matters. And then a membership body is the one that legitimizes authority in the rest of the body politic. And then keeping it all hemmed like a skeleton is a set of amenable bylaws and a constitution. And in a fascinating philosophical way, the country club originally conducted itself as a direct democracy, essentially. There was open floor discursive debates where anybody could have time to speak on certain matters. And every member voted for an elected officer. A corporate essentially just means that the country club was a corporation on a piece of paper. It was a legal entity that could enter into contracts, like leasing deeds, mortgage agreements. But this enables us to conceptualize the country club as an historical agent in itself. It is a unified body politic made up of a collective, and in the historical realm we can interpret it as an historical agent because it is a corporation that affects change to the outside world. We can look at internally how it evolves over time as well. This is the charter continuing. I like to show this because it displays the initial elected positions: president, first vice president, second vice president, which was a position that was phased out pretty rapidly in the first iteration at the first site. Treasurer, secretary, and then a board of governors. And we can also witness the original founding fathers: A.H. Grandy, Fergus Reed, John Graham Jr., Caldwell Hardy, George McIntosh, William C. Dixon, R.L. Overton, and Frank E. Wilcox. We can also observe two Victorian-era matrons. Mrs. Caldwell Hardy set a precedent that every single first vice president, and in fact, after they phase out the second vice president position, every first vice president for the first 13 years was always a woman, which speaks to both the absorption of progressive era values and women's activism and empowerment, but also it speaks to the influence and sway that women would have had within the institution itself. Just a quick overview of the biography of the founding members. These men are capitalists through and through. They were immensely wealthy economic elites. They weren't necessarily involved in the civic sphere as much, but they were businessmen. For instance, many of them had business connections in the cotton exchange, here exemplified by C.W. Grandy and Sons. They were cotton factors who had a warehouse at Lambert's Point. Many of them had investments in paper production, Old Dominion paper, as well as manufacturing and milling. William C. Dixon had his own building on Granby Street. This picture taken in 1909, again, demonstrates economic success, social status, and the boosterism that the founding members maintained. They were also very much involved in the financial sector of Norfolk. They were bankers, financiers, investors. They were highly, highly intelligent attorneys. They were also friends. They all pretty much lived in either the Freemason or Ghent districts. They attended the same parties. They went to the same restaurants. They went to the same churches. They were part of the same professional clubs as well as social clubs, some of the men's clubs that we looked at earlier. They were also philanthropists. With a lot of money comes an urge to give, and they philanthropically donated their money. They're also city boosters who intertwined their businesses and financial successes or failures with that of Norfolk. Essentially, what was beneficial for the founding members was beneficial for the development and modernization of the city of Norfolk. If we zoom in even further, take a micro-historical profile look at Albert Horace Grandy, who was the inaugural president of the country club, and it was very much his brainchild. That's my deduction, as he's the first president. His name is all over sources from this time period. And the Grandy family also represents like the living embodiment of the club's longevity. The Grandy members of the Grandy family are still active club members. They still participate in committees. They're still engaged in the body politic. They're still involved in boosting the city of Norfolk. But this man, Albert Horace Grandy, encapsulates the visions and the convictions beheld by pretty much all the other founding members, as well as the club at large. He was a lawyer and merchant capitalist for the family business, C.W. Grandy and Sons. He was a philanthropist. He donated his money to too many institutions and too many things around Norfolk to list. But for example, he regularly donated to a soup house almost weekly. And he was on the board of a local house of reformation, which is a rehabilitation center. And he served on the board of the Mary F. Ballantine Home for the Aged, which is a retirement home. We can sort of see where his values lie, as well as the club that he led. In the twilight of his life, he devoted himself to the art of newsprint. In 1896, he purchased the Daily Pilot, which was the newspaper from which I read that quote earlier. And then in 1898, he facilitated the merger of the Daily Pilot with another local newspaper called the Norfolk Virginian into what he called and is still called the Virginian Pilot. He served as the editor and president of the Virginian Pilot until his death in 1903. Grandy and his founding members, as well as the club, embodied progressive era values and also shaped how those unfolded in Norfolk. So why Lambert's Point? Why does the country club decide to make Lambert's Point its first site home? And I've given you 4 reasons, but for orientation purposes, here's the city of Norfolk, enveloped largely by these rail lines. I think it extends a little bit here, but we can see where the city is, and we can see where Norfolk County, especially to the northwest, extends. So it is still providing proximity to downtown and where everybody lived. It was not too far off. This is a map from 1894. So from 1890 to 1893, northwestern Norfolk County is developed for residency. You can see the streets here. It's developed by companies and city boosters. One such company is the Norfolk Waterfront and Development Company, which was represented by Barton Myers, who leased land to the club. And Barton Myers would become a lifelong member, and was also the patriarch of the Myers family and founded the Myers Construction Company, which is still a prominent construction company in the region to this day. So throughout the 1890s, corporate interests, City Hall, and club members actively embed Norfolk in maritime and continental trade networks, especially at Lambert's Point. We've already seen Grandy as an example. They have a cotton factory right here. Lambert's Point gives proximity to business and also gives proximity to social life. As another example of how A.H. Grandy was an active city booster, in 1896, as part of the Businessmen's Association of Norfolk, Grandy and his associates induced the Southern Railway Company to establish its operational terminal at Lambert's Point. That company, Southern Railway Company, was one of the smaller fish conjoined to create the conglomerate that is today Norfolk Southern. Again, it was far enough to escape the boisterousness and unsanitary conditions of downtown, but close enough to catch an electric trolley that had a rail line coming through here. You can sort of see it. And it was also close enough to bike. It was only about 3 miles from the city center. That's 25, 30-minute bike ride. And as is the case with most county-city dynamics, Norfolk County offered lower taxes, particularly property taxes, which made a lot of sense because the club had a lot of property, especially its clubhouse, as well as lower license fees. So in addition to being out in the country, removed from the city center, offering proximity to social and business life, it was also an economic decision to make their place out in the country. It was cheaper. Orient with this map, and now we zoom in to look at the first primary source that references the location of the country club here. This is an atlas of Norfolk and Norfolk County from 1899 to 1900. I like to point out John Graham Jr.'s, who was a founding member. His residence was right up the street, demonstrating the social connections in the area, as well as the properties of the Norfolk Waterfront and Development Company extended to 45th Street, which is today 48th Street. To my calculations, the first site is located either at Whitehurst Hall at Old Dominion or 1 block up. It's kind of hard to tell. This map also demonstrates to us just the vast scarcity of residences in this area. These old maps would have denoted property and houses with markings. Yellow, we can see the yellow country club down here. There's no other yellow markings on the map. The country club was truly a beacon that occupied this vast hinterland on the outskirts of Norfolk. Let's get into the first site. We're here. The next 2 slides are printed out over there if you'd like to take a closer look. But these doodles from the Daily Pilot are the only living pictorial representation of the first site clubhouse, which is fascinating because we can compare this visual source to written primary sources to sort of gauge what everything is in this picture, as well as what went on at this place within the club itself. The club set a precedent at its first site that it would continue to its second site and its final third site here. Architectural blueprints were always furnished by somebody in-house. The club never got somebody outside of its membership to devise architectural plans or really anything concerning the club in general. This is a $10,000 clubhouse in 1896, which today would be about $390,000. It was built by the Myers Construction Company. And we can see the estate's infrastructure in this picture, which to me really brings to life the club's recreational purposes as well as communal gatherings. The majority of members were cyclists who would literally ride their bikes to the club. So a bicycle house accommodated an incredulous 150 individual bikes. There were bicycle paths for the exclusive use of club members that snaked across the grounds. Stables accommodated horses, and also carriage drives snaked across the grounds as well for members to ride horses. The club also constructed a wharf off its west coast. We're oriented sort of to the south of the club. This is the Elizabeth River here. You can see sort of a sailboat in the background. The club constructed a wharf for its nautically inclined members to go for a swim, a sail, to row. But as the charter, as a lot of primary sources don't really say much about nautical sports in the beginning, they were still part of the club's social and recreational constitution, even if it's not necessarily documented as abundant as the other ones. The club also set a technology standard. This clubhouse was state-of-the-art in 1896, and you would think for $10,000 you would get a state-of-the-art clubhouse with modern technology. So in 1896, the modern technology was a waterworks system powered by a 65-foot tall steel windmill, which tapped 75 feet into the earth and deposited potable water in a 3,000-gallon holding tank, which essentially made the club hydrologically sustainable. It didn't need to have the city of Norfolk run water pipes to its clubhouse. And it makes sense because there are 200, 300, 400 members gradually increasing across the first site's period. So it makes sense to have an abundance of clean water on site. This middle house is a 2-story building for on-site staff. The country club would have kept a room and board and accommodations for some of its staff. Not everyone would have had to lodge on site, but there was a 2-story building for its staff built into the club's infrastructure. This is a door. Here's a chimney. We're about to enter that door, so stay with me. Here's a chimney here. Here are doors leading out to the west, porch facing the Elizabeth River. This is the interior of the clubhouse. They called it the main hall. We can see how it's elegantly furnished. A bunch of houseplants. Again, epitomize this notion of progressive era beautification, which is both manicured lawns, flower beds outside, but also aesthetically making the place look nice and green. This room also doubled as a ballroom for group dances such as cotillions, which is ironic because we're sitting in a ballroom right now delivering a presentation. But the club intentionally designed this big open space to foster group activities and lay the foundation of a certain type of club culture that really latched onto group activities, especially dances. There are specialized rooms that go along the perimeter of this interior room, such as reception lounges, a large cafe, private rooms for parties, but significantly 2 parlors, one set aside for women, one set aside for gentlemen. So gender inclusivity and women empowerment is built into the club's charter, its constitution, but it's also structurally built into the clubhouse's feng shui. First and foremost, the country club offered a means of diversion from obligations of everyday life. It's a way to escape and come to the clubhouse for enjoyment. And they did this primarily through social events and recreational activities. It's part of the culture. And the year was split into 2 seasons. The warmer months is when outdoor sports thrive naturally. And these were led by outdoor sports like tournaments, things of that nature were led by grounds committees, golf committees, tennis committees that were represented largely by men. The other half of the year was called the social season, the colder months when going outside really wasn't an option, it was too cold. So indoor social events would have thrived, and these were led by women on the housing and reception committees. So you can see this division of influence and authority, not only in the club's institutional structure, but in its cultural modes as well. And these social events and club tournaments, recreational activities in general, hinge on the devotion of men and women members to volunteer their time and effort. They're not paid to serve on committees, but they do it regardless. The bowling picture, this is not the country club. This is Bowling Green in Westmount, Montreal. But it sort of depicts the exact same social setting that would have been commonplace at the club from 1898 when it built its first bowling alley to 1902. And this showcases this combination of recreation with the bowling, as well as leisurely watching everyone bowl. The bicycle drawing showcases this sort of incorporation of recreation and social events into one. Not only were bikes transportation technology, but they would also work them into social events. This is depicting a bicycle party, which had a lot of sort of rules, but it demonstrates how we're incorporating recreation and social events into one. At the annual meeting held in March 1898, the club announced that it had paid off its mortgage on the clubhouse. It was entirely free of debt. It leased the land, didn't own the land that it occupied, but it was free of debt. This starts a snowball effect, wherein they begin to enlarge and enhance their recreational facilities as well as their beautification efforts. This leads to the first golf course in Norfolk proper in 1899, which is part of the club's natural evolution. But again, Norfolk could now tout to the regional community that had a golf course, and people didn't have to go all the way to Hampton Road or go all the way to Hampton and play the golf club there. This also led to an enlargement of tennis courts to regulation length, and the club holding its first of many Virginia State tennis tournaments, which it held at the club every year from 1899 to 1928. Because of this freeing up of salary cap, the club also constructs a bicycle path that ran from West Ghent to the club grounds, which was a cultural and literal trailblazer to today's Elizabeth River Trail. But in 1902, the club decides to relocate to its second site, north near Norfolk International Terminal. Why? The lease was ending in 1902, which made people start having conversations, discussing whether or not they wanted to renew the lease or find somewhere else. In general, the leadership and many members wanted to own the land on which the clubhouse resided. They wanted a safety blanket to deal with encroaching real estate and development companies. Should they come knocking to purchase the country club's land, they want to have the upper hand in negotiations. They want to own the land, own the clubhouse. It's natural. So from 1901 summer to 1902, these lead to discussions about what a new site could offer. Could offer material enlargement and quality enhancement of recreational facilities, as well as the clubhouse. A bigger clubhouse, better tennis courts, a golf course, and also more land. And an ever-growing membership kind of was necessitating a larger clubhouse in general. And there is a gradual increase in membership throughout the first sites. It's 75 at incorporation. By the time it opens, it's at 200. By October 1897, it's at 300. And then by October 25th, 1902, club membership stood at 500. So the club is very much compelled to sort of have bigger, more commodious quarters for its growing membership. And to facilitate relocation, there's a construction of a new house, as well as the purchase of 33 acres of land. The club issues 10-year bonds to the public. And I think they sell a lot because they end up shelving out $28,000 in total for the clubhouse, as well as the 33 acres of land and land improvement projects at the second site. So not only is the club pushing the limits of suburbanization in Norfolk, but it's ingraining itself in Norfolk's financial sector as an asset that people could invest in for the future. But relocating was not unanimous. It was pretty contentious, actually. It's a very hot-button topic, and according to the sources, it challenges the unity of the club and it poses an existential threat. Removal from the first site to the second site entails division, contention, and politics. So by the time an annual meeting is held April 13th, 1901, when they decide whether or not to move, there are two factions in the club, the relocationists and anti-relocationists. Those are my characterizations, but it sounds nice. So at the annual meeting in April 1901, 350 members congregate, and the stakes are obviously very high because an anonymous quote delivered to the Virginia Pilot from a prominent member says, quote, "In the event that the board and selection committee forced matters, there would possibly be a split in the organization, suggesting possible secession should anything be done in a top-down, forceful manner." But luckily, as we've seen, as I described in the beginning, the club is a direct democracy. So it does what direct democracies do. The special committee, it's agreed upon that there will be a mail-in referendum to decide where the club will move. They decided at that annual meeting that they will move. But a ballot with 5 propositions are mailed to the 400 members across Norfolk. There are 2 front runners: to stay at the first site or to move to modern-day Norfolk International Terminals. In the perfect demonstration of the imperfections of democracy, only 212 people returned a ballot, which is 53% of the members. And the total tally at the end was 107 for relocation, 100 against. So 7 votes determined the country club's fate to relocate from its first site at Lambert's Point to its second site at modern-day Norfolk International Terminals. And it may seem inevitable relocation because we're sitting at the third site now, so you know what's happening. You know what's going to happen. But in the moment, it's very much a contentious proposition. I mean, they are very internally divided, but because it's a functional body politic, democracy wins the day. Which brings us to the second site. And you can sort of see the difference in the clubhouses, right? The first one was a doodle, but you can see how this is much more opulent, more luxurious, appears larger. And there are very much clubhouse upgrades, particularly a basement where the club enhances its leisure activities. They call it an amusement hall in the sources. And I think they're catering to the fact that this is a family venue. They have 2 bowling alleys, darts, pool tables, ping pong, which they did not have at the first site. So they're expanding their interior recreational activities. But they also built a 9-hole golf course. They construct 4 concrete, not lawn-based tennis courts. But the club also transfers aspects of its first clubhouse, which it had done well. There's a main assembly hall again for meetings and dances. There's a public cafe, private dining rooms, parlor rooms for women and men. But at the second site, in the basement, there is also a division of locker rooms, one for men, one for women, suggesting an increase in social independence as well as influence of women in the club. The club had, again, modern technological gadgets, if you will. This is in the 20th century. The first one was built in the 19th century. So the club moves literally into the modern era. There are 4 telephone booths on site, a central heating system which has mechanically remained unchanged for 100 years, siphoning air from the outside, heating it up in a furnace, and distributing it through vents. It's the same thing we use today. There's an interconnected electrical grid, bringing electricity to every single room in the house. Call wires connected the clubhouse to employee quarters, which were again located on club grounds near the edge of the woods. But this time it has water and sewage pipes, so it abandons its sustainable waterworks. It also abandons its bicycle charm. It would have been unwarranted and physically exhausting to bike 6 miles from the city center to modern-day Norfolk International terminals. Also unwarranted because there was a regularly scheduled train that took members to and fro, even though it took about 30 minutes or so. At the second site, the club held the first statewide golf tournament in 1904, spearheaded by James Hume, who was the club champion and also a club pro at that time. He organized, as well as 4 other affiliated clubs throughout the state of Virginia. They organized the Virginia Golf Association, which is the predecessor to today's Virginia State Golf Association. The club also broadened its beautification efforts to include what is ostensibly suburban planning. It transformed the rugged woods next door into a park, which they called Whaley Park, named after then President William Whaley. Also, each Arbor Day, the club would plant a tree for each one of its members at the site. But the club is plagued by issues. There's still some contentious division about deciding to relocate. There's a lot of turnover in membership, particularly because it is so far away. It is 6 miles from the city center, doubling the length of the first site, and this causes social events, as well as people who are only half-hearted members who would go to the club for a day. Being 6 miles away meant you had to go to the club for hours on end. It couldn't just be a casual afternoon tea. It couldn't just be a casual game of tennis. This would have been a day-long excursion, which causes a retreat. And there are a few things that combined to force the club to sell its property holdings in December 1906. At the annual meeting, April 29, 1905, the club's finances are exposed to be in a poor state. Not sure exactly why, but according to the sources, there are improvements to the clubhouse and the grounds. There are renovations and improvements to the golf course, as well as the tennis courts. So material improvements seem to have exacerbated money problems. And finances are in such a poor condition at this annual meeting, they vote to levy an emergency assessment of $2, which is $75 today. And that passes pretty unanimously, right? Members are willing to give up $2. But in June of 1905, the members get together to vote and approve a constitutional amendment that raised dues from $12, which is $450 in today's money, to $20, which is $750, which is a 67% increase. That set the precedent that dues would increase to keep the club afloat. And also during this time, membership was growing relatively disaffected with the leadership. Again, the clubhouse is very far away. There's a severe lack of accessibility. Casual members struggle to get there. Social events experience a downturn. All of these sort of conglomerate and come to the fore in June of 1906, when the country club is approached by a land syndicate looking to buy up land to develop for the Jamestown Exposition of 1907, celebrating the tercentennial anniversary of Jamestown in 1607. And the country club hears them out. And the club ultimately decides to put their property holdings to market. And initially, the land syndicate offers $60,000. But after months of negotiations, remember a bunch of the founding members and leadership are attorneys and financiers and bankers. They know how to negotiate. They increased the price to $67,500 from $60,000 to include a cash bonus and also the transfer of the club's bonded indebtedness. And the country club is sold in December 1906. They very much saw the writing on the wall with the encroachment of both land development companies in the hinterlands here, but also they knew that they could make a pretty penny. As I said earlier, the second site totaled expenses was $28,000, which is approximately $1 million in today. And they sold everything in 1906 for $67,500, which is $2.5 million today, which is a profit of $39,500, which is a 141% return on investment. Needless to say, this profit from selling its second site clubhouse set the club up for future success, which leads to a doldrum period. The club was not in a hurry to find property to set up shop for its third iteration of a clubhouse. So for roughly 2 years, they're in a doldrum. There's some uncertainty about the future, but they're mostly calculating their next move. They have to buy a clubhouse. They have to figure out exactly the right property. On January 26th, 1907, shortly after they evacuate the second site, there's the annual meeting. They appoint a site committee, and they also suspended dues in the interim pending the development and construction of a new clubhouse. And then throughout 1907 and into early 1908, the historical record goes cold. If you search country club on newspapers.com, you'll get hundreds, thousands of articles. But in this time period, 1907, 1908, there's like 3, because it's hibernating. The club is not really doing much. It's biding its time, particularly because the secretary offered a quote to the Virginia Pilot that said, quote, "Real estate was soaring too high at present for us to be thinking of making a purchase of a site. It'll probably be a year or 2 before the club will purchase another site on which to build a clubhouse." Economic conditions were unfavorable to buyers. The club's a corporation. It's biding its time. It's acting rationally as any rational citizen would. But the club very much kept tabs on the economic realities of the outside world. So finally, in March 1908, that same site committee brings 7 propositions to the floor. But Proposition 1 was the obvious front runner. According to the club, to a club spokesperson, quote, "Proposition 1, the third site, was most attractive in location, of reasonable price, on immediate streetcar line with frequent service on the Jamestown Boulevard," which is now the Hampton Boulevard, water and electric light available, and beyond the city limits where taxes and licenses are lower. In addition to the advantages, there are 40 acres of suitable land adjacent, which may be used for golf links. So golf is now integral to the club's future survival strategy. And I use the Goldilocks effect to explain this because the first site was too close. The second site was too far. That's why they removed themselves back to the literal middle of the three. Excuse me. And Proposition 1 to move to the third site passes with a resounding majority, unlike the relocation complication in 1901. Everyone's sort of on board with this. It passes with 177 of the possible 201 votes. And the club finds its Goldilocks zone in 1908, 1909, but it comes at the tail end of 13 years of some trials and tribulations, a lot of internal disagreements, a lot of internal agreement as well. But after a couple of years of doldrums, the club had found its Goldilocks zone. Just a brief introduction to the third site as this ends. Our periodization here ends in 1909. This is the entrance to Lock Haven in 1909, and it's modern-day North Shore Road, which contemporarily has two brick pillars that say Lock Haven, very much a modern-day depiction of this arch. It's the same road. You can see how it sort of curves into the neighborhood. And just a brief introduction to the third site. In early 1908, the country club purchases from the American Boulevard Corporation 9.2 acres of desirable waterfront property in the Lock Haven suburb. So they scale back. The second site, 33 acres, was too much. They scale back and only buy 9.5. It erects a minimalist, though modern clubhouse, 6 concrete tennis courts, as well as a 9-hole golf course that runs through the neighborhood of Lock Haven, which we can dive deeper into in some succeeding presentations. The club continues to accommodate statewide tennis and golf tournaments on their modern facilities, and the membership very much felt reinvigorated by the fresh start and the club's accessibility. This is the culminating slide. This is a third site clubhouse facing east with the Elizabeth River to our backs, facing towards Hampton Boulevard in 1909. The club moved 3 times in 13 years, and I'm sure, as everyone in here knows, moving is a taxing, stressful ordeal. But still the club survives, and it makes me inquire why or how. And the club has resiliency. Its membership has dedication to the cause, to the country club model, and also the body politic and self-governance works. When you have a functional democracy, the club was able to overcome some internal stressors. And also country club culture became ingrained in the membership, and it also became universal. By the third site, everyone was pretty much on board. And as it moved from its first site to its second site to the third site, the club is incessantly followed by suburban developers and real estate developers. The country club is sort of this beacon moving from place to place that real estate and land development companies follow and subsequently set up shop around the country club and use its sort of model to sprout up suburban settlements throughout northwestern Norfolk County, particularly, again, at Edgewater, Lambert's Point, Larchmont, also the pop-up amusement park at Jamestown Exposition, and finally, the neighborhood of Lock Haven. I like to use the floor to say that if you have primary source material, secondary source material, letters, photographs, even if you have memories in your mind, we can use oral tradition, oral histories as sources as well. I am writing a book in conjunction with the Norfolk Historical Society as well as the Yacht Club. And I'm relying heavily on newspapers as well as some magazine publications or quarterlies of that nature. But as the book research expands from this initial 13 years, I'll need more sources. So this is sort of a call to action. If you have any sources at your house or any important memories that you think can be useful, we could use them. Okay, thank you very much.